So back in 2019, there was a book released, and you probably have never heard of this book. And the reason I say that is because this is one of these preacher books. There's such a thing, okay? So this is one of these books that pastors are like, my buddies are, oh, everybody's read it, and they're all talking about it. But it wouldn't have been on your radar for any reason. The book is called Dominion. It's written by Tom Holland, not Spider-Man Tom Holland, in case you were wondering. The other Tom Holland, ironically enough, they're both from England, though, so there's that. But it's called Dominion, and the subtitle is interesting, The Making of the Western Mind. So Tom Holland is a noted historian, one of the world's preeminent historians today, and he has spent most of his time focused on Persian and Roman history, but for some reason, he decided he wanted to turn his attention to Christianity. And he began to study Christianity even though he is not a self-proclaimed Christian. He's not a follower of Jesus. He doesn't identify as that. But he wanted to understand specifically what impact, if any, Christianity has had on our culture, on our values, on the way we think and operate, particularly in the Western world. And the conclusion he came to was, I think, a bit shocking to him. And as he released this book and walked through it, at the end of the book, here's a little bit of what he had to say about this. He said, people in the West, even those who may imagine that they have emancipated themselves from Christian belief, which is his fancy way of saying, and some of you can get this because you're not Jesus followers, you're not church people, and you would say, oh man, I've kind of moved on beyond that, Matt. I'm not going to be limited by these narrow Christian beliefs. I'm not going to be limited by this, this point of view or this perspective or this worldview that's just not adequate anymore. That's how you would view it. This is what he's talking about. He's talking about you. He says, even people who feel like they're free now, they're emancipated from all of these Christian beliefs, in fact, he writes, are shot through with Christian assumptions about almost everything. In other words, you can denounce the teachings of Jesus, but you find yourself with all kinds of assumptions and holding all kinds of values based on the teachings of Jesus. And so even though some people want to throw those out, you're kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. Like you throw that out and you throw out a lot of things that you actually hold dear. And the way he concludes all of this is simply by saying this. He says, all of us in the West are goldfish, and the water we swim in is Christianity. In other words, we couldn't escape it if we wanted to. There are certain things, I'll give you an example. There are certain things that we all hold dear, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not. But Tom's point is, all of those values that you hold so closely, all of those rights that you hold so dear, all those things that you say every human being deserves, well, they're actually all tethered to, anchored to, and founded upon the teachings that Jesus introduced to the world. They're founded upon what he taught and what he ushered in and introduced that was brand new in his time. We don't realize it, but we swim in Christian waters. I'll give you a quick example. All of us in this room, one of the things that we all have in common is we believe every human being has equal value, dignity, and worth. We all hold to that. We would fight for that. We would protect that at whatever cost. We all believe that's true. But do you know where that came from? That came directly from the teaching of Jesus when he was here and he said, everyone matters to God. This is where it came from. Jesus taught that we were all created in the image of God, and because of that, everyone matters to God and has equal value and dignity and worth in the eyes of God. And so years ago when Thomas Jefferson was penning, the Declaration of Independence, and he said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Well, the reality is, it was not self-evident when Jesus introduced the idea. That's not the way the world worked. Back then, might made right. He who had the power got to make all the rules. People were not treated with equal value, dignity, and worth. If you've read much history or know much history, you know that to be true. And we could even make a case that when Thomas Jefferson penned those words, it still wasn't true. After all, we know he was penning all men are created equal while he and so many others had slaves, and while there were so many other things going on that were unjust in our nation and around the world at the time. But they still intuitively knew this is what should be true of all people. And you can trace all of that back to Jesus and his teaching. There was no thought of that before Jesus showed up. And here in the West today, We may have lost sight of the source. We may have lost sight of where it came from. But we all swim in Christian waters. The challenge is, for those of us who are Jesus followers, well, we're called to do more than just swim in them. Today is week 2 of a series we started last week called Be Known for Something Good. And if you weren't with us, here's your 30-second catch-up. We're spending a couple of weeks talking about what it means to be for. What it means to be for people. What it means that God is for us. More specifically, for those of us who are Jesus followers, what being for requires of all of us. And again, I'll unpack this a little bit for you at the beginning so it makes a little bit of sense to you. Because when Jesus showed up, not only did he teach that everyone matters to God, but Jesus also taught everyone matters to God whether God matters to them or not. Which, if you stop and think about that, is a much higher standard. It means for those of us who are Jesus followers, we're required to care about people as much as God does. We're required to love people in the same manner that God loves people. And God's love for people is not changed or impacted or influenced or directed in any way by what that person does or does not do. According to Jesus, God's love for people is consistent whether they care about God or they don't care about God. You can't group people into categories. You can't put them into buckets. You can't have the in and the out, the us versus the them. Now, when Jesus came and he taught this, he destroyed the idea of an us versus them for a Jesus follower. There simply can't be one. Everybody matters to God, whether God matters to them or not. So for those of us who follow him, everybody should matter to us in the exact same way. This was so central to Jesus' teaching, and it's still central to what it means to follow him. And he talked about this often. If you grew up in church, you may remember this. Hearing this story, one day a religious leader came to Jesus and said he's trying to figure out how to simplify following Jesus, which is actually a good thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It ought to be simple to understand. But this religious leader came to Jesus and he asked him a question. He said, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And he's referring to the law of Moses. Now, the law of Moses has 613 specific commands. Imagine, trying to follow all those. Some of you are like, I grew up Southern Baptist. I know what that's like. Okay, you understand. So I grew up Southern Baptist too. So anyway, 613. Okay, that's a lot. It's a lot. And this teacher is basically like, hey, could you help me out? Jesus, I'd like to know out of those 613, if I'm only going to focus on one, if we can simplify it, what's it going to be? And you may remember Jesus' response. He looks back at him and he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, which is your emotions or your passion, with all your soul, that's your spirit, and with all your mind, that's your intellect and your thoughts. So you can't just go one way or the other. It can't be, it's all emotional. It's all intellectual. It's all of the above. He says, this is the first and the greatest commandment. Not surprisingly, that's a great answer. You would expect a great answer from Jesus, right? That's a great answer. You should just love God with all your being. That's what you would expect to hear. But Jesus didn't stop here because Jesus knew there was a problem with this answer. See, in his day, the religious elite of the day, the religious leaders of the day, had grabbed hold of this, and this is all they cared about. But what they had done, because they thought the most important thing was just to love God, is they had made their relationship with God entirely vertical. There was nothing horizontal about it. It was just them and God. It did not matter how they treated anybody else or what they did in terms of their interactions with other people. It was just, is everything good between me and God? Well, I love God, so everything's good. And Jesus knew that was a problem. And the reason you can fall into the trap of thinking it's vertical and it's all about you is because that kind of love for God is immeasurable and it's intangible. There's no way to actually know. If I look at you and say, I love God with all my heart, there's no way for you to know if that's true or not because you can't see my heart. And so because it's not visible, I can say I love God with all my being, and then I can treat people any way I want to treat people. I can say I love God with all my heart, and then I can have an us versus them mentality towards you. Does this sound familiar to anybody? I mean, this is still an issue for those of us who are Christians today. I love God, and I do, maybe we want to define, I go to church and I do this and this to prove it. I love God. And now I can treat you however I want to treat you, and the two are in no way connected. Jesus knew that was an issue. And so he removed that option for us forever because he didn't end his answer right here. He said, and the second is like it. To which I'm sure the guy was like, I only asked for the one command. He said, I'm going to give you two. But the two are one and the same. The two are like two sides of the same coin. You can't do one of these without the other. They both mean the same thing. But I'm about to define for you in very tangible terms how you know if somebody loves God. He said the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, some of you grew up in church. You've heard this. It just kind of rolls off your back. It's like, oh, yeah. But I want you to pause for a second. And I want you to think about how high a standard Jesus just set. He just said, the way you know you love God is you love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. Who in your life do you love as much as you love yourself? Some of you are sitting there going, well, my family, of course. And I wouldn't argue with you about that. I'm sure you love your family that much. But who gets the remote? Who eats the last brownie? You know what I'm saying? Like, you love your family a lot, but that selfishness still creeps in, doesn't it? It's hard for us to love our family as much as we love ourselves. Jesus' standard for Jesus followers is not to love our family as much as we love ourselves. Anybody can do that. His standard was to love our neighbor as much as we love ourselves. So how well do you love the people in your life who are not your family? How well do you love them? How often do you love them as much as you love yourself? I mean, who gets your time? Who gets your money? If you look at the people in your life and you go, it's not 50-50, I don't love them as much as I love me. Well, we all just discovered we've got some room to grow in loving God. Because, according to Jesus, your love for God is measured by your love for others. Jesus just made love for God extremely tangible, very measurable. You don't have to wonder how much somebody loves God anymore, and you don't have to listen to them tell you how much they love God. You can see and measure it for yourself. Now, if this is a little disturbing to you, let me give you the example I always give that just, I think, makes a lot of sense here. If today you decided to be unkind to one of my two kids, and tomorrow we had lunch, how do you think that lunch is going to go? Exactly. I'm not going to sit there and act like nothing happened. We're going to have a conversation about what you did to my kid that was unkind. That makes sense to all of us. And if you looked at me and argued, Matt, that had nothing to do with you, I did it to them, not you, I would say, well, you clearly are out of touch with reality because they matter so much to me. Whatever you do to them, you do to me. Well, in the same way, what Jesus is teaching us is that every person on the planet, every person you lock eyes with, matters infinitely to their Heavenly Father. And so whatever you do to them, you do to Him. You can't say, God, I love you, and be unloving towards that person. It just doesn't work that way because they matter to Him. So they have to matter to us as well. That is an extremely high standard. And that standard creates so much accountability that it causes all of us Jesus followers, all of us Christians, to do the thing that we are best at doing. Do you know what we're best at doing? Finding loopholes. That's what we're best at doing. If you ever grew up in a church, you know churches are amazing at finding loopholes. Jesus said this, yeah, but that didn't really apply to me because, we're always looking for a loophole to try to get out of whatever it is that He said. Well, the people in Jesus' day, when they would hear Him teach this, it was so shocking and so accountable to them that it caused them to look for loopholes too. Luke tells us in his account of Jesus' life, and this was possibly another conversation, that another guy had asked Jesus this one time, and Jesus gave him the exact same answer. And when He answered, you've got to love your neighbor as much as you love yourself, This guy looked back at Jesus and he said, and who is my neighbor? Can we define that? Surely you don't mean everybody. So let me ask you, who's your neighbor? Who's in your neighbor circle? See, part of the reason this guy asked this question is because in first century Jewish world, they narrowly defined neighbor as only Jewish people. So that would have excluded most all of us as only Jewish people who followed the law of Moses well. So not even all Jewish people. My neighbor are only the people who believe like I believe, behave like I behave, and align with me. That's who my neighbor is. And this guy asked the question expecting Jesus to say, oh, you don't have to love everybody like that. Just this small segment of people who already have figured it out and who are, quote unquote, living the way they ought to be living. And much to his surprise, Jesus told a story that I'm not going to tell you right now, where he completely redefined how Jewish people in the first century thought of a neighbor. Jesus redefined neighbor as everyone in every nation and every generation. Do you understand what this does to all of us? It means as a Jesus follower, us versus them is no longer an option on the table. As a Jesus follower, there's no longer the option or the opportunity to take a whole category of people and say, I'm not going to love them. To take an individual who's at work in the neighborhood, wherever it is, it's just being so difficult and say, this doesn't apply to them. I'm going to love these people as much as I love myself, or I'm going to try my best to do that, but that doesn't apply over here. This is Jesus' way of saying, no. I'm taking that option off the table. Now, you're supposed to love everybody in every nation and every generation, which means whoever you run into, whoever you hear about, you're supposed to love them as much as you love yourself if you're following me. And if you can't do that, if you're not doing that, well, here we are again. We have some room to grow in terms of how well we actually love God. Because your love for God is measured by your love for everyone in every nation and every generation. So, every year about this time, we come together as a church and we do a thing called our annual offering, and I shared about that last week. But the whole reason we do it is because we have to practice this. Because it is not easy to love people as much as we love ourselves. And it's sure not easy to love people who don't believe or behave the way we do, to love people who in some cases we look at them and think that whole group is the problem, that whole group is an issue. But this is what Jesus defined loving God to look like. And until we get this right, we're not loving God well enough. It doesn't matter how many times we show up here on Sunday and how many sermons we've heard and how much we sing during the music and how many times we read our Bible. None of that matters if it doesn't translate into us loving every person we lock eyes with as much as we love ourselves. That's his definition of loving God. So we come together as a group and we try to practice every year. If you weren't here last week, and if you're new around here, give me 30 seconds. I'll catch you up on this. Basically, what we do is we get a small group of volunteers from our church, and we send them out to talk to nonprofit organizations all throughout our communities. And we get them to ask these nonprofits 2 questions. What would make a big difference for you as an organization? What would help you make a big difference in the lives of the people you serve? And what I love about this is these organizations rarely, I'm not sure any of them are quote unquote Christian organizations. They don't have to be. Because our goal is not just to cooperate with people and work alongside people who believe just like us. Our goal is to love people as much as we love ourselves, whether God matters to those people or not. So they come back and tell us, well, here are all the projects that would make a big difference. It'd be game-changing for these organizations, life-changing for these people. And then I stand up like I did last week and say, okay, over the next few weeks, we're going to give as big as we can possibly give. And we're going to give every single penny away to fund these projects. Nothing stays internal. We're going to give it all away. And then we show you guys, once we're done, we show you guys a video of us delivering these checks and the impact that's going to make. Last week, I talked a little bit about some of the local projects in our communities. I gave you an overview of that, and I'm not going to go through all those again, but they all revolve around one of three issues: hunger, homelessness, or helping at-risk kids. And hopefully, we're going to be able to partner with a lot of nonprofits doing some incredible work in all three of those areas. And we're going to make an impact. And you guys have proven this over the years because you're so generous and you give so much. But you impact thousands and thousands and thousands of people every single year. It just keeps growing. Today, I do want to give you a bit of a snapshot of some of the global projects that we're going to also invest in. Because as a group of Jesus followers, our job's to love everyone from every nation and generation, not just people in our communities, to love them as much as we love ourselves. And so there are a couple things that we started over the last year or two that we're going to continue to invest in, but I want to give you a little more detail about them. One is church planting. So let me tell you the backstory on this real quick. We are part of a network of churches. Most of you aren't even aware of this. You don't need to be aware of it. It really doesn't matter. But we're part of a network of about 100 churches in the U.S. and Canada who are all trying to create a church that makes it simple for people to follow Jesus. So it's a group of churches that are like-minded, not just in what we're doing, but how we're trying to go about doing it. That we want to be for our communities. We want to invest in our communities. We want to be known for doing something good. There's some incredible churches all over the U.S. and Canada. And I was with all of these pastors this past week down in Dallas. We spent about 3-4 days together. And one of the things that we're doing as a network that I want you to be aware of, because you are a part of this, is we have a vision to make sure everybody in North America is within driving distance of a church like ours. And some of you, you understand the importance of this because you come to me when a son or daughter, a mom or dad, a brother, sister, whoever, moves to a new area, and you're like, hey, could you recommend a church for them to go to? And what I often do, if we have a church in our network that's in that area, that's the church I recommend. So you get it maybe better than anybody because it gets personal. You want them to have a church like this that they can engage with and that they can continue to follow Jesus and grow in their faith. Well, every single person in our country deserves to be within driving distance of a church like that. And here's something interesting. If you were to evenly disperse churches like ours across the United States, geographically evenly disperse them, which as we all know doesn't happen, but if you did, it would only take 350 churches to make sure every person living in the U.S. was within driving distance of a church like ours. Well, we've got about 100 churches in our network now. And we're committed to doing whatever we can to make sure there's a church like this for everybody. So over the next decade, we're going to do everything in our power to make sure we get to that 350 church mark. And one of the ways we're doing that is by starting churches in areas where there are no church like this. Now, some of you will remember this. Some of you, this will be new information. But a couple years ago, the network allowed a group of us to start building out a coaching program for church planters. And last year, we began beta testing that with 4 church planters. So without you even realizing it, you have been helping 4 church planters and their churches get off the ground around North America. One is going to be starting a year from now in Bangor, Maine. One is going to be starting in January in Three Hills, Alberta, Canada. If you've ever been to Three Hills, you were lost because it's in the middle of nowhere, kind of in the vicinity of Calgary. And then 2 of these 4 churches that we've been beta testing this with have already launched. One is in Moyock, North Carolina. They're already running about 150 people, making a huge impact in their community. And another one just launched last month in Raleigh, North Carolina. So last week was the first time in a year since they started this that these 4 church planters got in the room together. And they are so grateful for the investment that you, without even realizing it, have been making in them as we've been coaching them and helping them to get started. And while we were at this gathering last week, we announced to the entire network that this church planter program is ready to go public and ready to scale up. And so over the course of the next couple of years, we're going to be helping to launch 20, 30, 40 churches a year around the U.S. You're playing a part in all of that. We'll have brand new church planners we start coaching next year. So number one, I want to say thank you because, and this blows my mind, I don't have a lot of time to talk about this, but let's just pause and be honest for a second. How does anybody even know we're in Murray, Kentucky, much less they're paying attention to what we're doing? Can we be honest? It's unreal to me that you, doing what you're doing right here, are inspiring so many people. So thanks for being a part of that. We're going to continue to invest in that and help that build and grow. The other thing that you're a part of globally is our UK partnership. So there's a church in England, not UK as in the Wildcats, but in England, there's a church in England that's pastored by Chris Porter. It's called Andover Church. They're trying to be a church like ours in their community, and for the last year, we've been partnered up with them. And our staff's been in regular Zoom calls with some of their staff. We've been trading ideas with each other. We all got together in Atlanta back in May, and we're able to hang out for a little bit together. And you have made a profound impact on that church without even realizing it. And part of the bigger reach of that is they are also part of a network, just like the network we're a part of. We're kind of sister networks. They have started a network in the UK and Ireland. And if I remember right, they started back in 2019. And because of your investment in them, it's had a profound impact on that entire network as they have been working to grow and expand that and make sure everybody in UK and Ireland is within driving distance of a church like this. So last week I was with the leader of the network. His name's Duncan Banks. He is a great guy. And I'd asked Duncan a few months before, hey, would you shoot a video to let our church know what's happening where you are? And as you'll see, Dunk is quite a character. He's a great dude. He went above and beyond. So he sent a little message to you from England I thought you might want to see. So check out the screens.
Oh, hey Journey Church. It's Duncan here from the Further Faster Network. And I'm in London right now, and it's not raining. Listen, I'm beyond grateful for how generous you guys have been to us through your Be Rich campaign. Now, our aim is to see a church just like yours that unchurched people love in every community around the UK and Ireland. So we started back in 2019 with 5 churches. And 12 months ago, we'd grown to a staggering 25 churches, which was amazing to us. Then something happened. Journey Church. You guys invested some time, some expertise, and some money in us. And as of this fall, we've now grown to 40 churches, which is truly amazing. Now listen, before I blow your mind with some stats, you'll need to understand something about us and our culture. In the 1930s, around 30% of the UK population were members of a church. By the year 2000, it was down to just 12%. And in 2024, it's fallen to 6%. 6%. But with your help, churches that are part of our network are slowly bucking that trend. Our churches are growing. On average, our churches together are seeing around 850 people a year finding and following Jesus. Now, our aim is to grow to 100 churches by 2030. And if we can do that, we think we could see up to 2,500 people a year coming to faith. And if we could get to 400 churches, we'd see a church in every community and up to 10,000 people coming to faith every year. Now that feels like revival to me. So just by showing up, giving to Be Rich, our story has become your story, which according to our law entitles you to a free cup of tea if you come and visit us. So, what are you waiting for?
So you got a free cup of tea out of it, if nothing else. Every time I talk to him, I think to myself, I would sound so much smarter if I had that accent, but we're stuck with what we got. So in the network, a lot of churches do what we do with our 4 offering. They call it Be Rich. That's why he was referring to it as that. But you have played a part. I don't know if you caught this. I mean, over 4 years, 5 years, they went from 9 churches to 25. And you got involved last year, and they went from 25 to 40 in a year. That's a whole lot of people being impacted. And the reason we're investing in these things is because it's our responsibility to love people from every nation, in every generation. So, what I want to invite you to do if you call Journey your church home is very simple. You need to give because we have one goal for this annual offering. It is 100%. That is not inspiring to me. Okay. And we got a long way to go to get there. We have never hit this goal, and you're going to make me quit if we don't hit this goal. So I'm intent on us hitting this. If you call Journey Church your home, I want you to participate. It doesn't matter how much, that's up to you, but I want you to be a part of this. We're giving every penny away to these local and global projects. You can go to our app, you can give there, that's super easy and quick. Go to givejourney.com if you want, scan the QR code, and there's a box right there. All the info's right here on how to give. If you give online, you choose the annual offering. It's very obvious. And all your money, we'll give every single penny of it away, and we'll show you what we did with it. Now, to wrap up, here's all I want to say. If you're not a Jesus follower, or you grew up in church and you walked away and you said, I'm done with that, they're so hypocritical, they're so whatever. Imagine if you had grown up in a church where the Jesus followers loved people as much as they loved themselves. You would have never walked away. You'd want to follow Jesus in all probability. And you would definitely understand just how much God loves you. Listen, we have a chance to be those people and to be that kind of church right here. To be the kind of place where we love our communities as much as we love ourselves. And we have a chance to be a part of making sure that happens for people all over our country and in places all over the world. Imagine how different our world would be if every community had a church that was loving people like that. So, you want to love God? Love gives. Love acts. It's just up to us to do it. Let me pray for us. Father, it's certainly not easy to do, but it's what you've called us to. And fortunately, for those of us who follow you, you have placed your Spirit inside of us, and you have given us the power and ability to become more like you, Jesus, to love people the way you love them. So help us not to settle for creating loopholes around this. Help us to lean into getting better and better every single day at loving the people around us. And this week, when we run into instances and there are individuals or there are groups of people we just want to put into a category and we want to justify the way we're going to treat them or respond to them, remind us. Our job's to love them as much as we love ourselves. And give us the ability to do it. And it's in your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.